You are listening to the Central Indiana Sports Report, episode number 214.4, the IU Report with Grant Shouse. This week, a roundtable about Darian DeVries' hire as the men's basketball coach with, of course, Grant, Michelle Garmon of the Tipton Tribune, Josh Sigler making his debut. He's a former reporter at Wabash and Kokomo, and a special appearance by Will Rutherford. Just kind of threw him in at the end as kind of a grenade.
You're listening to the Central Indiana Sports Report with your host, Greg Mengelt.
Welcome, basketball fans, to a very special edition of the IU Report with Grant Shouse. We are joined by Michelle Garmon, a frequent guest on the Central Indiana Sports Report, and Josh Sigler, a first-time guest on the Central Indiana Sports Report. Josh is a veteran reporter, an author, and an IU fan. So we talked the day after IU hired Darian DeVries, but we haven't talked about him since. So interested to hear what IU fans have to say. We got three big IU fans. So take it away, Grant.
Yeah, I mean, I think, looking at it, first of all, it's I think Indiana made up their minds a while ago that they were going to go get Coach DeVries. You have to wait for other things to happen in terms of, waiting for his other season to be done with his other job and, with his other coaching job. And I think they had him in mind from the very beginning. This is a guy that has a really good track record, played at Northern Iowa, was an assistant for 17 years at Creighton with Doug McDermott. And, Doug McDermott's made a name for himself by being the coach at Creighton. And he went on to take over at Drake, led them to 3 NCAA tournament appearances, most recent being in 2024. He took them to the NCAA tournament, takes the West Virginia job, then ends at Indiana. And one thing that jumps out to me about him, first of all, is the fact that they name him and his son was a really good player at Drake and for the cup of coffee he drank with West Virginia. And they're going to get him to come to Indiana, which is such a huge portal addition. And I've been saying it, if you are an Indiana fan and you like Trey Galloway, Anthony Leo, Luke Goody, you're going to love Tucker DeVries. And so he's the package deal with his dad, and hopefully they can hit the ground running in the transfer portal. It just opened up. There's already over 1,000 kids in the portal. I think Indiana's going to be a hotbed spot to land a lot of these names. So looking forward to seeing what they can do out of the portal.
I personally wasn't surprised that it was Darian DeVries or that his name wasn't mentioned a lot sooner. I thought Scott Dolson, he was going to follow along the blueprint he did in hiring Coach Signetti, because, Coach Signetti was on a couple lists, but down the list early on when they were looking for a football coach. And he was very good at keeping it to the vest. In fact, that's the one thing I'm always very impressed with about Indiana athletics and Indiana University. They are able to keep things so tight that if anything's leaking 2 weeks, a month or more out, don't trust it, because it's not coming. It's somebody trying to guess so they can say they got the big scoop. My guess is, because I personally believe that if this decision had been Dolson's, Whitson would not have been back this season. So my opinion is that Dolson put together his own list and probably had made inquiries and stuff a year ago. And I'm going to guess that maybe May was on that list, but once he got the Michigan job, it wasn't going to happen. But I personally am very pleased with Darian DeVries. I happened to watch Drake play Indiana State last year a couple times. I like their style as far as they are a good defensive team. They move the ball well, create nice open looks. The thing is, I think Indiana is their men's basketball program, something they have not done through Archie Miller and Mike Whitson, is they're going to have an identity again. They're going to have something how they are going to hang their hat on. So don't you think so, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's if we're being honest, in the last few days, it's grown on me, the decision. Honestly, at the beginning, I thought, man, with how hasty it seemed, considering that, DeVries had a job at another power school, how far removed were we from realizing that we weren't going to get a bid before the hire was made? And I understand that, it was talked about that wasn't going to come back. So I think Grant was right. It's been in the works, but I just don't know how much time DeVries himself was able to spend in Bloomington. And for me in the beginning, and we can touch on the committee that did this and how it ties back to Signetti, but for me, it was like, this just feels like the next version of watch me and my version of how I messed this up. But DeVries he's young. He's going to be 50 here in about 12 days, I think. He's from his high school days, he's from Appleton, Parkersburg in Iowa, which, if you guys remember, the football coach there, I can't remember his name right now. Anyway, he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and then a year later he was murdered. The football coach was. But anyway, he comes from a winning pedigree all the way back from high school. I think that, to Michelle's point, the committee that found Curt Signetti in the rough, I've been told, at least, maybe this is not true, but it's the same committee that, sought out DeVries and hired him. I like the energy. I agree that, we waited a year too long for Woodson. I mean, look, we lost the McNeely recruit over that. But I'm excited for the energy and a new face. And I mean, we all saw today that Mbako entered the portal. So he's going to have some spots to fill, but the energy, the background, it's grown on me a lot since this was announced, and I'm on board. And I want IU to get this right because, listen, as a fan, college basketball is not the same if IU is not relevant. And for me, and really, I mean, the whole state of Indiana, really, even Purdue fans want to see IU better. So I hope this is the right pick.
I can vouch for that. I'm a Purdue fan, and one of the things I want most in the world is a world where IU and Purdue are battling for Big Ten and national championships again. I think it's been since the early 90s when you had Anderson at IU, and I think it was Anderson. Was that his name?
Henderson. Eric Anderson. Yeah.
And Henderson. And then you had Glenn Robinson at Purdue. Is the last time both programs were great at the same time. And that's sad. So I can vouch for that.
Yeah. To kind of go off there, what Josh was saying with, getting DeVries, it wasn't a name that I think kind of popped out. Because, let's be honest, all Indiana fans, message boards, and just the general fan, they want to hit a splash because it's Indiana. And you're just not going to get that. You're just not going to go get a Scott Drew or an Otzelberger at Iowa State.
That's okay, because I don't want Scott Drew.
Right.
Never have, never will.
And you're just not going to get a splash like one of those names. So that's why you got to go get, the Darren DeVries of the world. That's why you got to go after the Ben McCollums, who are kind of these hot young names that just made a name for themselves recently. Not
what I like
that are established.
Yeah, but you know what I like about DeVries? Because I think that IU has formulated some really good blueprints here lately. I mean, Terry Morin, perfect example. Okay.
Yep.
She was an assistant coach, and then she coached at UIndy D2, then spent a couple seasons at Indiana State, and then Indiana hires her. And now Indiana is one of the top women's, one of the top 30 women's programs in the nation. And how good a coach is she? Just look what they did just look what they just did in Saturday. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, other than, I think, of all the teams, the Big Ten teams that played in the NC2A tournament, and it's probably because Indiana has been there last 6 years, is they were prepared. I think, UCLA, USC, and everything, they all were too. But if he does what Terry Morin did, and I think he's that kind of coach, he has a system. He's going to bring in guys that fit his system. He's not going to go after a guy just because he's a 5-star. Yes, he would love to have him, but if he's not going to fit the system, if he's not going to fit in the locker room, he's not going to get him. I look at it this way. Matt Painter kind of learned that through trial and error at Purdue. I mean, he really did. I mean, people forget, 15, 20 years ago, Matt Painter was on the hot seat with a lot of Purdue fans and everything. So I think that's what I like about DeVries. And I think he follows the Terry Morin philosophy. I think he follows the Coach Signetti philosophy too. He's going to surround himself with a good staff. Terry's got a great staff. We know Coach Sig's got a really good staff. He's going to try to surround himself with a great staff and then get players that fit what he wants to do and what he wants to accomplish. And, what I really like is I will say this. I like the fact he's already visited the Uptown Pub. I like the fact he wants to connect with the students in Indiana University. I like that. He wants to be in it. No, and neither really did Archie Miller. Tom Crean was the last coach that Indiana had that immersed himself into the university, the whole student and the community. And it's nice to get a coach back that wants to do that. And
yeah, I mean, I think that Michelle makes a great point, because I live up here in South Bend now, and Mike Bray went through a lot of mid seasons, but you know what? He went to the linebacker. The fans loved him, and I think that can having some some diplomacy in that regard, even if it's just for appearances, like that can it felt like, in my opinion, Mike Woodson was a little out of touch with where he was, even if he is an IU legend. And again, I think that Coach Signetti has shown that this committee knows what it's doing. And I really do hope that this is the one that we get, the engine running again, because, I think the fans are tired of it. And I wish I hated IU, and I don't. So I hope that we make the right one here.
Hey, just to back up there on what Josh said about Mike Bray real quick. You're right. Mike Bray loved interacting with the people. Mike Bray's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet.
Yep.
In terms of so down to earth. And Indiana needs a coach kind of like that. Someone who's, not like Mike Woodson, where they're way, he's way up here and everybody else is way down here. That's just so, that's disappointing, I think, to the average fan that comes across him. Yeah, I'm sure he is a nice guy. He is a nice guy. Every time I've, interacted with him or seen him, he was gracious, but he wasn't one of those guys that was going out and hanging out with the students and trying to get, students to come to games and speaking to the community like Signetti has. And that's what Indiana people want. They want people that are going to be involved with the other things that are going on around them. And that's why I think Darian DeVries fits that mold.
And support the other programs, because I think Indiana does that very well. I mean, I think Terry Moore and everything, that's the one thing that you really like about that is how supportive they are. But Woodson wasn't. He was out of touch. And I will say this, I haven't seen as many IU men's players go to women's games as what you did the first couple of years Woodson was there, when he had players from the past. And I don't know that Archie Miller necessarily showed up at women's games, but part of me thinks Archie Miller didn't really know or care where his players were in the off hour or whatever. I think he was a little out of touch. I think Woodson has brought in and the big payrolls and everything, and the guys just didn't support the other sports like they have, like some of the other sports do. I mean, it's kind of sad. And because I think that as a program, as a university, as a school, if you have all the athletic programs supporting each other, that brings success. Tennessee is a perfect blueprint of that, back when Pat Summitt coached and some of the people they brought in. And I think Michigan State is a great byproduct of that. You want to talk about one of the reasons I think Tom Izzo has been so successful and now owns the record for Big Ten wins too, is because he's very successful with other programs. Matt Painter is too at Purdue. And if you look at those universities where coaches and athletes support each other, they're the ones having the most success.
And even you think about that with that same thing translates to high school sports too. I mean, it's the exact same thing. And go ahead.
Michelle and I talk about this a lot about Tom Crean. He was around Tipton and Hamilton Heights programs a lot, and he treated the reporters just as well as he treated the recruiter or the coach. And I hope that DeVries, he seems like on the surface that's going to be the thing. And I think that whether you recruit Indiana heavily or not, that's how you got to treat people, and I think that goes a long way. But I do have a question for the Purdue fan in the room, if I may. Greg, I think that sometimes it's better to ask about our own fan base through the eyes of another, fan base. And what's your take on all the other IU legends that have become coaches, like staying so far away from the program? Do you think it's because the pressure's too much? Do you think that they worry about hurting their mystique in the end, or is it just such a toxic job for people that came from Bloomington or were a big name in Bloomington as a player earlier on?
I don't think the administration ever thought any of those guys was the right person for the job until Woodson, which is kind of a shame. You would have liked to have seen Alford being such a legend, getting a shot. For example, I don't go that deep into it, so I don't know. But all I know is the last couple of hires, you could see it coming from far away that it just wasn't going to work. My thing is, I felt like this needed to be a home run. I do not feel like DeVries is a home run. There's a time to hire a guy like DeVries. I don't feel like this is that time. I would have liked to seen a splash, a guy that is going to win and win right away. But
DeVries wins. Dusty May won at Florida. DeVries wins. Maybe it's not a Power 5, but if you look around at some of these coaches that have stepped up, and I think here's my thing. I think when you look at some of the mid-major programs, I think the Missouri Valley Conference is one of the most underrated conferences, because I think the top end of that conference is pretty good. And I think it's terrible that they usually only end up with one bid in the NC2A tournament. Like last year, perfect example, Indiana State should have been in the tournament right along with Drake.
Absolutely.
And I'm sorry, like this year, you put a 6-12, a team like Texas that went 6-12 in the conference. I'm sorry, anybody, you go 6-12 in the conference, I don't care what conference it is, you do not belong in the NC2A tournament.
I would much rather see a team like Indiana State in the tournament than Texas if things are being even. I want to see the best teams get in, but things being even, who wouldn't rather see Indiana State in the tournament than Texas? Well, except for Texas fans.
The computers even would tell you. Indiana State was one of the bigger snubs in recent memory. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were easily in the top 40 of the Ken Palm and the Net, and they just got left out. And I felt that
conference is very underrated.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, and I think the MAC is under. I know it's going down, but the MAC also, when the MAC is good, when they have 3 or 4 good teams, they're good. It's an underrated as both I think the MAC is underrated as both a football and a basketball conference, because people just see mid-major, and I think that's so wrong. And especially what they really need to do is take a look. The Missouri Valley Conference comprises teams around basketball hotbeds: Indiana, Iowa, Illinois. These communities, and rural. Basketball's pretty big out there. You can see their attendance numbers. Basketball's pretty big in Illinois, and we know it's big in Indiana. And I just hate that. It's like I think it's because it is so money driven. That's the sad part. I don't even know if it's so much power conferences is sometimes when you start looking, it's, some of those blue bloods, or it's just big markets where they think they're going to get the viewers and the ratings to transcend into dollars, which I think is terrible, because I think it takes away from the tournament. And those people wanting to expand the tournament, please no.
That's a whole other subject, I think, for another podcast. That's, I'm not for expanding the tournament, but if you were to expand the tournament, I think there's a certain way you could expand the tournament. Talk about DeVries here and being a guy at a mid-major level, kind of like a Signetti, and Greg said it. He doesn't think that DeVries is a home run, and I agree with you. But here's my thing: is I think he could be a home run in the when it's all said and done. I didn't think Signetti was all that much of a home run on the surface when he was named the head coach, but a few games into the year, I think you started to realize, okay, this guy might not be a double or a triple. This guy might be a home run. So I think he's gonna have to prove himself at the start of the season. And Indiana's non-conference this past season did them no favors at all, and they performed poorly in their non-conference. And next year they're going to have better non-conference opponents, I think, for him to prove himself against bigger opponents.
I like to hear that because I can't remember the last time I looked at the non-conference slate and thought, man, that's going to challenge that team before they get to Maui, before they get to Atlantis, and then what happened this year? They got run off the floor and went back home. And I hope, because sorry to cut you off again, but look at the Kansas and the Michigan States of the world. They're going to go into the tournament with 7 losses, but they played the toughest conference, or not in some of the conferences, but also a very tough non-conference. Sorry, Grant.
Yeah, because Indiana's going to play. They're going to play Kentucky. They're going to play Marquette. I'm sure there'll be some other teams they get in there. I know of one mid-major team that is in the works of being on the schedule. And even that mid-major program made the NCAA tournament last year. I'm not going to say who it is because the guy who told me not to tell anyone. But they're somewhat as close to the situation. But they're going to schedule a really good schedule, and I think they will. And that's what you need going into the gauntlet of the Big Ten. When you play Elon and you play North Alabama, that's only going to do, and Winthrop, that's only going to do so much for your program. That's not going to get you any better. You're playing those games because you have to schedule games, and they're pay games for these other programs. That's why they're playing you, and they've given so many of those opportunities to other teams to beat them. Almost losing to Winthrop last year, and almost losing some non-conference games at home that they should not have lost, or they didn't perform very well for the first 30 minutes of the game. And you just can't expect to win games after doing that. And it's not fun for the fan base. I mean, look at the other teams that, played little schools, play these little non-conference games. They're supposed to be winning. They're supposed to be dominating, and then they do. And then here's Indiana, who's supposed to be this blue blood, who's not doing that. They're not performing to expectations. So Indiana's non-conference schedule did them no favors this past year, but I think this next year's will get them ready for Big Ten play and hopefully ready for the NCAA tournament.
What I like with DeVries is, he's not going to shy away. And I don't think he's an excuse guy or a slogan guy of it's my job just to get us over the hump and just put that on a loop and replay that after every game, in the post game. I think what's so disappointing when you look at the IU men, and I know some people will say, well, the IU women weren't as successful this year, and they weren't, but Terry doesn't make excuses. She doesn't. I mean, the IU women, they had, Woodson, oh, well, we've got these new transfers in here and all this. Well, okay. Terry, they had two new transfers that came in, and they had 2 returning players start the season on the injured list, and one never got to play, and one missed the entire season. Bargesser and Beaumont were heavily in the preseason plan, as IU's preparing for the season. Well, now it's your 2 guards. So now you graduated Scalia and everything. So now you've got these 2. I thought it was terrible because the money that that Woodson spent on the men's program, it's like he thought, if I just go get these 5 stars, I can just roll out a basketball and they'll go do it. Or effort, I can throw in a lot. Woodson spent.
But Michelle, real quick, I also think that goes back to Mike Woodson's ego, thinking he can coach anyone and they can be good.
Well, yeah. Well, this is what I was going to tell you. Josh and I talked about this last week or so, and I said I thought that Woodson's 3 biggest problems: 1, too many years in the NBA and too many years away from the college game. He really lost all touch with the college game. 2, he didn't like to recruit. He didn't want to go out and spend hours recruiting or sit up in the stands and meet people. He didn't want to recruit. And I heard, and I think Dan Dockich can be I don't always like Dan and his takes, but sometimes they're pretty good. And I do believe he does have good sources. And when he was told, when he says that he always heard with Woodson, he didn't like to go recruit unless there was a golf course nearby, I believe that. And then third, what again, like you said, Woodson's ego. I mean, his ego was in the way, and he didn't develop an ego, and then maybe for his lack of ability to develop any players and perimeter players, which that to me is still confounding to this day, that he couldn't take perimeter players and develop them, considering he was one of the premier wings to ever put on an Indiana University jersey.
Yeah, I think the proof's in the pudding in that this year. Look at Carlisle and Rice. I mean, you just saw them completely regress from the year before.
And Tucker, how about Tucker?
Yeah, I mean Tucker too. Yeah, and so I think that you guys are hitting on a good point here. And the point that I just want to add is that to be a college basketball coach, to be a good one, you have to put in the time. You have to get your knuckles dirty. You have to roll up your sleeves. And if you aren't willing to do that, and you don't have a staff that's willing to pick up for you, the product on the floor is going to suffer. And I think that, I can't say the same for the last few coaches, but for Woodson, it was almost like, I'm going to sit in this country club and I'm going to sit in my office. I'm going to run this like a CEO. And that's just not how even within the days of NIL and these $1 million contracts with these players, you still have to put in the time. These players are going to develop themselves. And if you have this indifference at the top, it just trickles down. I'm glad that we made the move. We needed a guy with energy, and DeVries seems like he's got a ton of that right now, and I'm going to give him a chance, but I hope that I'm wrong.
Yeah, Josh, you mentioned guys like Cannon Carlisle, and Greg can back me up here. I could not stand to watch Cannon Carlisle in an Indiana uniform. His shot.
I've had those players.
I like watching him early on the defensive end.
I've had those players at Purdue over my life that I couldn't stand to watch. And by the way, one of them was Matt Painter. I just want to point that
out. With Carlisle, he came in as what was, a really good 3-point shooter, and he just stunk. I mean, he stunk at shooting, and there were other guys that I thought were disappointing. I thought Rice was disappointing for the entire year up until maybe the last 5 or 6 games. I was really disappointed in Galloway for a lot of the season. This is a guy that's been there 5 years. The one guy that I felt like never let me down, I don't know about you guys, the one guy I felt never let me down was Anthony Leal. I don't care about, stepping on people and stepping in the groin or in the groin area during Purdue games.
Yeah, but did you look at that film? First was trying to trip him. Before that, he stuck his leg out to trip him, and that's why he kicked it back.
To me, it just looked like he was getting up to go sprint back on defense.
But if you watch first leg, you don't catch it. I watched it on the third because I decided to concentrate just solely on the leg actions, and you can see first is trying to trip. Not maybe just trying to trip him up to not let him, because he knows he can't get up easy. So he's trying to slow him down. And then he does that. And he didn't kick it. Let's face it. He didn't step or kick very hard because he first required no help getting off the floor and no ice pack. I'm sorry. I've been around and I've covered enough sports to know he really got in your head.
Yeah. He then immediately reacted to the referee.
Yes.
If someone gets, we know, if you get hit right there, you're down. You go down. And then you complain to the referee.
Just to talk about defense for a second, I know Michelle mentioned it in passing, but I think when IU went to the lineup of Leal, Goody, and Galloway, it was for me. It was me. Those guys play defense. Those guys bring energy, and you could count on them with the ball. I can't remember at least a couple times where I thought, man, Rice's decisions at the end of the game absolutely cost their team a chance to win. And I felt those 3 veteran guys who you could make good decisions. And then, obviously against Oregon, nobody could hit anything, and they looked lost, and Balla was ready to pack his bags. But I think that, at least at the end, they went with the guys that were going to bring the energy. And if you remember, I know you guys do, that's when IU played its best basketball, put them, selves in a situation that if they played better in the Big Ten tournament, they would have made the tournament. But it was a little too late. that's the most disappointing thing for me is that even the Mbakos of the world, like they didn't improve. They came with a lot of highly touted, words from recruiting services, but when they got to campus, they just felt like they regressed.
Yeah, just go ahead, Michelle.
I was going to say, I just feel like what we learned through Woodson's 4 seasons, and really we learned it after his 3rd season, and that's why he should have not have been back this year, was he was only good his first 2 seasons because Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson stayed. And played. And Ray, those two were good buddies. They know each other well. And I think they were leaders. They developed and were leaders, work ethic, floor leaders. And once they left because of this portal and everything, he didn't have those guys anymore. And Woodson didn't know how to do anything. And I want to say one other thing, Greg, you were talking about, or somebody was talking about, Josh, maybe former Indiana guys that maybe come back and coach. I think when they hired Woodson, they had it in place. I think they really wanted to give it to Dane Fife in a couple of years, but Woodson ran Dane Fife out. And I really believe he did Dane Fife dirty because I think he felt threatened by Dane Fife on his bench.
He did. Just jump in real quick. He 100% did. And he just accused Dane Fife of things that weren't even true and just that had nothing to do with basketball. And, cost Dane Fife his job. That's why Thad Matta, that's why when he was on the staff at Indiana, you never heard anything with him. He was never really a coach. He didn't sit on the bench. He sat at the scores table. And then after 1 year, he went and got the job at Butler. It was because Mike Woodson felt threatened by those kind of guys that had been head coaches and had been head coaches in the college game, especially with Thad Matta. He took Ohio State to two Final Fours. The guy can coach. He's a better coach than Mike Woodson. And I think Mike Woodson felt like that Thad Matta was brought in by the administration to kind of keep an eye or kind of be, I wouldn't say keep an eye on him, but you know what I'm trying to say here. Kind of be like a guy that could be the coach in waiting if this doesn't work out. And then Thad Matta went on to do other things, and then Mike Woodson didn't like it. Thad Matta was never brought in on any meetings. He was never involved in any meetings. He was never involved in any practice planning. He was never involved in drills and practice and helping guys. He was there basically, and his title was basically he was an athletic director who was representing basketball. He was in charge. He worked for the university, and he was just in charge of basketball. He was not a coach, which is kind of what he was brought there to be. He was beyond what you would say a consultant is.
Yeah,
he was a kind of a special assistant to the head coach, which is what Gene Cady was at St. John's at one time. So, and I think that bothered Mike Woodson, and then it obviously didn't end up working out, and those guys went on to do other things. And then when they left, him and Dane Fife, either A, they never said anything about Woodson, or B, when they did, it was never positive. It was always negative. And that should have been the biggest red flag to the people of Indiana, that this guy was not fit and did not meet the character requirements to be the head coach of Indiana basketball.
Yeah, and I hate that for guys like Calvert Chaney and Jordy Holes, who obviously Indiana in their own right, and now they've got this black mark on their resume. I don't know what DeVries is going to do in terms of a staff, and I would imagine that those guys aren't going to be kept. But yeah, there's just a lot of good people that were around the program that wasn't just kind of shut the door on, and everything soured on him. And at the end of the day, Mike Woodson had a good situation that he ruined on his own. He had a good situation that he ruined on his own.
Let me ask you guys this question. Are we all in agreement that Mike Woodson didn't really retire and that he was just fired?
Oh, I know. Here's what I think it was. I think here's what I think. I think this is the choice he got. And what's ironic about this is my sister and I were talking about this on our way home from a women's basketball game, because, we have season tickets to the IU women. And I said, here's what I think is going to happen with Mike Woodson is I think before the season is over here somewhere, and within the next couple of weeks, and it really happened a couple of days later, I said, Dolson's going to call him into his office, and he's going to say, okay, here are your choices. The one thing we know for certain, you will not be back as the men's basketball coach here at Indiana University. This can go one of two ways. You can retire or resign and then have your legacy left intact. If you choose not to, we will fire you you will be fired at the end of the season. And I think that's the way when you're talking about someone with Mike Whitson and what his legacy as a player, I think that's the right way to handle that. Let him have a chance to go out as he's retiring or resigning. I don't have a problem with that. Just as long as he was gone.
Yeah, that's 100% what happened. I think that's a no-brainer. So, when I asked the question of do we think he was fired or did he actually retire? That's kind of what I'm asking. So I don't want people to.
Are you asking if you think we'll see him pop up on somebody else's coaching team?
I think he resigned. No. I think he resigned before being fired because he knew it would come.
Yes, that's what I think. And no, I don't think we'll see him coach anymore. And especially not in college. I don't think he'll be in there for the NBA. I don't think he'll join the NBA. Go back to an NBA franchise. But he has his legacy as a player, which is important because he was a really good player and he deserves to have the legacy as a player. But it stinks that now his legacy as a coach is what he's going to be remembered for. He's not going to be remembered for being this amazing player that won Big Ten Player of the Year and then went on and played in the NBA and came back to coach his alma mater. He's not going to be remembered for that. He's going to be remembered for all that, and then the guy who came and set Indiana basketball back a long, long time. And that to me is just sad.
We have a new guest in the studio. There's been way too much love for Darian DeVries, so I thought I'd bring in Will Retherford to play negative Nelly for you because he does not like to hire.
I feel quite honored to join this. I mean, you guys are phenomenal IU fans. I'll give it to you guys. It is. I love. It's a great listen.
There's a whole lot of Elwood vibes in the hall. They haven't beaten us in football since 2000, or no, or what?
All right, Will. What's your take on the hire?
I don't think it moves the needle at all. I don't think it's a good hire. I think that they lost out on the Calipari sweepstakes last year by their inability to get rid of.
No, Calipari. Nope. Sorry. Nope.
Guy's a winner. Everywhere he goes, he seems to win.
He doesn't graduate players, and I don't care even in this NIL day. You are a college coach. Your thing should be to make sure you graduate your players and they leave with an education, because even if they're making money, it's not going to last forever. That's the most important role as a college basketball coach is to make sure your kids leave with an education, or as good an education as they can. That's what I firmly believe. Sorry, but you got to look at the future.
I want to add something here, and I want to ask this question to just Will.
Okay.
Let me ask you a question. Would you rather be a college athlete and make $1 million, or be a college athlete, not make any money, but then get your diploma? What are you picking?
I think for me personally, it would probably depend largely on, what my status after college. For somebody that is going to the league or has aspirations to play professional basketball, I would say that they would care much less about the diploma. And they would care about making $1 million, getting a start as far as marketing deals, advertisement, stuff like it, getting their name and presence out there. I would say that's more important. But like for somebody like me, that would never in a million years have aspirations to go to professional, I would say that I would care a little bit more about the education.
Right. It depends on your field, of course.
I was going to say, yeah, but I think a perfect example of that is somebody, because he made a lot of money, but he's been injured, but has invested wisely, and he's running, music and different things, is Victor Oladipo. I mean, He left after 3 years, but he graduated. He had a degree in his hand.
Yeah, and in those days, Cream was having those guys. This might be like a status quo for what we're dealing with now. But like Cream made those guys go to class. In fact, I think if those guys were on campus, he made them take summer classes, and even like
Yes, he did.
like the Etheringtons of the world and the Elstons of the world, and the guys that also got hurt or didn't pan out the way that they had hoped. They left with degrees, and they're doing good things now. So again, but the NIL has changed the game completely, and for better or for worse, Michelle, I agree with you saying a degree is very important, but unfortunately, the way that college athletics has moved, they've made it so that these kids don't have to value a college education as much.
Don't you think? I think of somebody like Calipari. Here's where I'll disagree with you, Will. He's good. He's a 5-year plan. He's a 5-year plan as a coach.
Calipari. I think the point
No,
is,
I know, but I mean that kind of guy is a 5-year plan.
And what I said with Chris Beard, you got to get the best basketball coach. You're hitting a double when you needed a home run. That's my
as a female, no.
Unfortunately, Greg, I think a double's generous. I think this is a come up, and I think this is going to be a strikeout. He is far less accomplished up to this point in his career than Archie Miller even was. I mean, Archie Miller at least taken a team to the Elite Eight. I get that odds have been stacked against him a little bit at Drake. It's a small school, small collective in this NIL market. But, I mean, you can't tell me that he is any more prepared to be a coach than Archie Miller was. In fact, I think he's much, much less prepared.
How many games have you watched DeVries coach, Will?
I mean, West Virginia turned it around.
How many games have you watched him coach?
I watched West Virginia. I probably watched 5 games this year, college basketball.
Okay. Did you watch him at Drake?
Yeah, I watched him in their tournament. I mean, he's a good coach. I'm not saying he's a bad coach.
Archie Miller and DeVries, and I will take DeVries over Archie Miller at that time every single day of the week.
I agree with you, Michelle, but I see what Will's saying here, in that maybe DeVries hasn't done enough to prove himself to be on the quote unquote blue blood level of Indiana basketball. I see what you're saying. But I do think DeVries is more fit to be the head coach at Indiana than Archie Miller ever was, before and even after.
Grant, let me pose a question to you. You seem to have some inside information, which is incredible for your age. I'm very impressed by this. So help me understand this a little bit. Obviously, we've discussed what went down with Woodson behind closed doors in the middle of the season. For you, with this hire, do you think that it was too hasty? There it goes. It was too hasty because, I mean, I know we had that time, but what I'm saying is, like, in the committee had that time, but how much did they have face to face with DeVries? Like, how much did they really know about the human being other than what was on his resume? And how much time did they have to spend with him before they made this hire, which couldn't have been any more than 48 hours after we got the notice that we weren't going to the tournament? It just felt hasty to me. And I hope I'm wrong, but when this eventually goes wrong, I'm going to look back to this and say you guys could have taken a little bit more time, because we're just now into the Sweet 16, and he's been the head coach for a week. So it's like, I mean, what do you think? Do you think that it was hasty, and do you think they had enough time? And how could they have if he was coaching his own power program?
And Chris Beard's doing it again. So.
No, I think
you could have your Chris Beard. That's fine.
If you want to win, he was the guy.
No, I agree with Greg, but to answer your question, Josh, I think Indiana had their mind made up a while ago that that's who they wanted to hire.
And when did DeVries get the note that he was the guy?
I think a few weeks ago.
Okay.
I think it was long. I think it was a while before he was named the head coach, and here's why: because if you watch his press conference, you listen to his press conference, he said Indiana was so gracious in not interfering with our basketball team at West Virginia, something along those lines. So I think they were in discussions for a while, and whether or not that's tampering, I don't know. I don't know that it's illegal. I mean, but I think Indiana and him have been in talks for weeks.
I've heard months, Grant.
Maybe months. I think it's been months. I think it's been since after Christmas they've been in talks.
Well,
especially when things started to go south. When things started to really go south, then it finally became the point where we may have to make a change in our basketball program, especially after the football season that they had.
Yeah.
Scott Dolson and them are sitting there saying, we have to do this with basketball.
Yeah.
And so when I think that's when they decided they needed a change. And what better? I wouldn't say what better, but that's when you got to look at a guy like Darren DeVries, because you're not going to be able to poach the Scott Drews, because and here's why, because Scott Drew was the candidate to be the coach of Kentucky last year and turned it down. So why would he turn down the Kentucky job for Indiana, which is just no different? I mean, the only thing that's different is that Indiana's red and Kentucky's blue. I mean, it's kind of the same heritage.
Yeah. I just hope that the buyout was worth it at this point is where I'm at.
And I don't know
hope you're
why
right.
Tony Bennett was not. Why you don't just throw
I don't think
everything
Tony
at him,
Bennett
or
wants to coach, and they may have put a feeler out. He left the game for
Jay
reasons.
Wright, or
Yeah, I mean,
Jay Wright doesn't want to get back in as a coach either.
Bennett.
it's
Yeah.
IU. You sell him on.
They don't like where the game
I
is
know, but
at.
they won national championships with their program, and Indiana's not won one since 1987. They've
think
had
that-
more recent success at their respective programs before they retired than Indiana has in what, 25 years.
An important point is being missed here, and I think Michelle was trying to make it. It was the same time you saw Boeheim and Krzyzewski and Wright and Bennett all leave because they didn't want to deal with the money. And so I don't think that it's a matter of, oh, well, Indiana has this mystique or Kentucky has this mystique. They just don't want to deal with players making more than their staff.
Yep. Yeah, I agree 100%.
My point is, it wasn't a big enough splash for me. I think
Right.
there were better options, and I think it's a B at best.
I think that the issue that's been with IU for the last 10 years is that they still consider themselves a blue blood, and they've not gone further than the Sweet 16 since I've been alive. So I'm 21 years old. They've never gotten past the Sweet 16. They're not a blue blood anymore. This is a middle of the pack program. I mean, they're not even these West Coast teams the Big Ten brought in have more prestige and have gone further in the tournament in the last 10 years than IU's even thought about. This program is not a desirable location for a majority of these high level coaches. They're going to get constantly berated by the fans. They're going to face pressure from day one. I mean, this poor guy. I mean, we IU fans have made him the Messiah. He's never even stepped foot on the floor. I mean, it's just the expectations are completely unrealistic, and he's gonna feel the pressure day one. Assembly Hall is not a fun place when your team's not performing well. Mike Woodson is a definition of that. So is Archie Miller.
Hey, Will, don't take this the wrong way, but it is young fans like you guys, and not you, but your age, okay? That
Okay.
look at stats and numbers and things like that, and you throw out and you criticize. My biggest beef is seeing all these young people that are under 30 years of old. Most of them have probably never even attended a class or a year at Indiana University. They like to think they're know-it-alls. They never have probably ever coached at any level above, at high school or above, to really know exactly what goes into it. That's the one thing I always try to do. I try to see it because I have been. I've coached, I've broken down film, I've scouted, I've done a lot of that stuff.
What's gone into it's been a lot of losing lately.
Oh, it has. But I haven't liked either. I wasn't enamored really big time. I don't think with either one of the last two hires. I definitely did not want Archie Miller.
Right.
And let's hope DeVries can turn it back into a blue blood. I think that would be good for the entire state.
I think Will and Michelle's points can both be true right now. Like, the fact is that I was a senior in high school last time we played in a Final Four at IU, and I didn't go to IU, Michelle, but I love IU. You've known me most of my life, but for better or for worse, IU's fallen off, and I think that we can agree that it's because they've made a series of poor coaching hires. I mean, all of the ingredients, Will, no offense, all of the ingredients to turn this thing into a winner is right there for the taking. It's just the right guy that needs to take the reins. And the question for me is DeVries going to be the right guy when we look at this a couple years from now?
I mean, I hear what you say, but I mean, they IU is floating around. They're not even in the top 10 in NIL collective. I mean, they're the second largest alumni association in the entire world for a university, and they're just not performing the way they need to. The fans don't rally around, and I think that should be ingredient number one. These schools that are constantly successful, that they pour money back into their programs.
Hey,
I mean,
I heard that
there's
IU is like 1 or 2 in the Big Ten in NIL collective last year. So
well,
They've got a
They
lot of
that's
are.
money. I don't know, man.
One or two in the country in NIL.
Yeah, we might
yeah,
want
they actually they've got a $10 to $12 million in revenue sharing and NIL collective for this next year. 10 men's
I mean,
basketball 10 to 12.
I got a page up right now. They had 13.6 million in NIL collective. That's 12th in the country. Now that's unofficial, but that's what the news sources are reporting, and I just don't think that's good enough. I don't think that because you go down the list and you're staring down a bunch of SEC schools and a bunch of schools that really want to be good and they want to be great, and they're not. IU's gotten complacent with being mediocre. That's just what they are. And unfortunately, it's a disservice to the fans because IU has incredible fans, incredibly passionate fans. But until they buckle down and say we want to be a phenomenal basketball program again, they're just unfortunately not going to.
Michelle,
And maybe
respond, and then we got to go.
okay, maybe for me it is, and I would want to, and it is there, but I don't want to throw away money on a player that is talented, but it's going to come in and not fit and maybe not stay. I don't want the Calipari's turnovers at Kentucky because in the end it hurt Kentucky. You know, that kind of stuff. I want a guy that can get some of those guys, but wants to build a program and have, hey, Matt Painter. Let's just take a look at the blueprint that Purdue and even Michigan State has done. I mean, Tom Izzo went from an assistant coach under Judd Heathcote to head coach. He didn't come in with a lot of splash. He had a system and a plan and what he wants. I'm not saying I don't know if DeVries is the guy, but I like the fact that he fits to me more of a mold of a Matt Painter and a Tom Izzo than he does of maybe a Shaka Smart, you know, all the flash and everything, even a Scott Drew, because Baylor has not. I mean, what did Baylor do this year? Okay, it's harder. It gets harder in this day and age to win.
Final word.
I want to talk about women's college basketball just for a second, if I can. There was a girl from Kokomo, Indiana, named Kendall Bostic, and she played the final game of her college career yesterday at the University of Illinois. And this young woman has just poured her heart and soul, not only into the game of basketball, but the kids around her. She runs a youth camp in the summer in Kokomo. And I just wanted to say congratulations to Kendall Bostic on a wonderful career and for representing herself and her family and the community in a first-class manner in a way that I rarely see young people do these days. I feel like she deserves some honors.
And you and I and Michelle are going to be talking about her coming up in it'll probably be a day or two for the podcast, but coming up.
There's so much to intake here because we're just going off what we think's going to happen. It's hard to do this and really talk about it because Coach DeVries hasn't done anything yet. But to go back and kind of recap it, I hope he can interact with the community and the students. I really hope he can get Indiana back on track and not set it back further than it has. The thing is, and we were just talking about it earlier, and how good of a job it is. This is the question I'm asking: is Indiana really a good job to have? And I want you guys to think of it. I wouldn't say answer this because I know this. We could talk about it for much longer. But think about this, and to the listener, think about this. Is Indiana really a good job to have, or was Bob Knight just a once-in-a-generation coach who made Indiana really relevant and really good for 30
Oh, Grant,
years?
now you're showing your age. Branch
That's
McCracken
right.
before
Branch
him.
McCracken.
I'm sorry.
That's right.
Indiana had some good coaches prior to Bob Knight. I'm sorry. This is where your youth is. This is where your youth shows.
Yeah. It was definitely a blue blood from the very beginning of college basketball. Unfortunately, Will is correct. Does not seem to be anymore. Again, I really hope that DeVries changes this. As a Purdue fan, I want nothing. My list of things I want to see in my life and sports before I die, number 1 is the Pacers championship. Number 2 is IU and Purdue to be good at the same time again. Thank you so much to our IU guy, Grant Shouse, for running the roundtable, and to Tipton Tribune and Elwood Call Leader Sports Editor Michelle Garmon, and special guests Josh Sigler and Will Retherford for joining the Central Indiana Sports Report. And thank you for listening. Please share this segment with your IU friends and family to help spread the word about the Central Indiana Sports Report. We thank you in advance. Central Indiana Sports Report is a product of ITG Media, and I love Susie.